Hello everyone, and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the online festival of ideas curated by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? My name is Leo, and in this, the fourth session from Cranfield University at this year's DIF, titled Grill the Aspiring Geeks, three Cranfield University PhD students, Sabrina Capullo, Oki Okori, and Tobias Widmer, will be quizzed about their current circular economy focused research. And we call on you, the audience, wherever you are watching from, to help with the quizzing. This is a grilling after all, and so do please put your questions in the chat box just below this window. And Sabrina, Oki, and Tobias will be put to the sword by Dr. Marielle Moreno, Academic Fellow at Cranfield University. A few days ago, three educators from Cranfield University were grilled about their thoughts on circular economy and how circular economy is an integral part of the postgrad teaching curricula at Cranfield University in the session Grill the Circular Geeks, which is available on DIF on demand. Now it's the turn of the postgrads to face your questions. So, Mariella, it's over to you at Cranfield.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Marielle Moreno, and I'm an academic fellow in data-driven innovation, and I work in the Center for Design. And I have here with me Sabrina, which is a Marie Curie early-stage researcher in environmental science at Cranfield University. Oki, which is a PhD researcher in the School of Aerospace, Transport, and Manufacturing here also at Cranfield University. And Tobias, who is a PhD researcher in supply chain management within the School of Management, and also it's a PhD researcher from the Marie Curie program in the program Circuit. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here. And I would like to start with Sabrina. If you could tell us in 2-3 minutes what your research is about.
Okay, thank you for inviting us, first of all. I am an environmental chemist, and I work in a European group, and we look at contaminated land. Since 100 years of industrialization have left a legacy of contaminated sites in Europe, but also worldwide, we're looking at ways to assess the risk of this contaminated land, and in the idea of the circular economy, perhaps reuse these contaminated sites and remediate them in order to build potentially housing or whatever is the need of that particular piece of land. So my job is to look at the complex mixture in the soil and understand how we could clean them up, what is the real risk for potential receptor, and what is the toxicity of this compound, what we could actually do to reduce the contamination in the soil, since we cannot clean to pristine level, because that would be ideal, but is not possible.
Great, thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
I'll go now to OK. So if you could explain in 2-3 minutes what your research is about.
Hi everyone, thank you, Marielle, for the introduction. My name is Oki Okori, and I'm here as a PhD researcher, and this is going into my third year here at Cranfield. And my research is actually focused on utilizing manufacturing data to implement a circular approach. Now it involves looking at things that support the manufacturing data, like the business models, like also the supporting frameworks. But more importantly, it is looking at obtaining manufacturing data from an engineering system, and then using that to then tell, to implement a particular circular approach. So I began with an SLR, that's a systematic literature review, where I looked at, did a few research on the kinds of approaches that are available that data support. So things like recycling, things like reuse, things like remanufacturing. And from my initial research, remanufacturing was actually the less looked at approach, and that's owing to a different variety of reasons. So I am now then focusing on remanufacturing, hopefully adding a body of knowledge to it. And I'm also focusing on automotive components. So for automotive components, I'm looking at the hybrid vehicle. So I'm focusing on what we call the rechargeable energy storage system, and that's the battery system using hybrid vehicles. So like we know, we are moving to a stage of less gasoline in our cars into electric and hybrid vehicles. So it's important that we also determine the post-life stage of these various components, and that's actually what my research will actually achieve at the end, hopefully.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and now I pass it to Tobias. Can you explain us what your research is about?
Thank you, Mariel. It's great to be here. Great to be again on the DIF. So I am part of Marie Curie ITN, which is called Circuit, and we are a team of 15 PhD researchers among 7 universities in Europe, and we look at different components of circular economy, in particularly focusing on product service systems as an enabler for circular economy. So the idea behind product service systems is that you require less virgin materials, you can exploit the embedded materials better, etc. You can analyze the data collected. So what we do within this research project is looking at different components, business models, design, user acceptance, system and enabling systems. And we, 2 positions here in Cranfield, look at the supply chains for servitized goods within circular economy. So within this scope, I am looking at what value means in outcome-based contracting. So outcome-based contracting basically meaning instead of selling a good, the owner, the OEM, the producer, retains ownership over the good and just charges for use. This has been for a couple of years now been advocated as a kind of type of sustainable business model. However, these articles and the case studies, etc., claiming that these are sustainable business models, they are more on a, let's say, for less complex products. As the famous examples come from like baby proms and washing machines, etc. We here in Cranfield look more at B2B solutions. So highly complex socio-technical systems, and looking on how the supply chain can enable these. So putting basically all the bits and pieces together that research is doing in design, in production, in more efficient transportation, etc. Put these components together and see how the supply chain of such servitized goods can look like, and how in the end can value be produced for all of the stakeholders within these value creating system, and not just for the customer, not just for the supplier, but the provider, but all actors within this network.
Great, that's fascinating. Thank you, all of you, for explaining to me and to the audience what your research is about. So I will do some follow-up questions now regarding to what each of you said. So Sabrina, I would like to know a little bit more about the challenges that you face to reuse some of these sites. It's fascinating that you're looking at it from a more complex of the soil itself, and which are the contaminants that could be there. So I'm guessing there should be a lot of challenges in terms of health, for example. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about that?
So sites that are called brownfield, they basically are sites that are not greenfield, so they are contaminated, and they could have been an industry or like gas work site. The real challenge sometimes is to understand who created the pollution, and also who's gonna be the person responsible, so the one that is gonna pay and clean up the contamination. But from my point of view about what I do, the hardest part is to understand what are the contaminants, because when we work in the laboratory, We often use simulated soil, so we spike with the defined compound, and we know what we put, so we kind of can predict the outcome. While what I did in my PhD, I used site from a real contaminated site, and you can't really know all the compound. There's many that we know about and many others that we don't know about. And the hardest part is knowing how they're actually going to interact in the soil and also with the receptor. So once a site is contaminated, what usually happens is that they do a total screening. So they take samples at different locations and they analyze them for total content, total metal, and total organics. But in reality, what we observed, not only me, but many researchers, is that this concentration tend to be decreasing over time. The reason why is because organic compounds like these ones, they can be broken up by the bacteria, so they are able to degrade this organic compound. They just open the ring and use the carbon as a nutrition source, while the metal gets sorbed into the soil. So the overall contamination gets lower and lower during the time, and this process is called aging. So if we look at the total metal from a risk point of view, or a total organic, that is not what our receptor would be in contact with. So my job is to understand the bioavailable fraction, which is the fraction available to biological receptor. That could be, I work on the ecology side, and my colleague in Belfast, Tatiana, she's working on the human side. So I look at the human side is very interesting and is the main focus at the moment when we talk about risk assessment, because of course we are humans, so we care mostly about us. But also the ecological receptor are very important. Also, if we look at river and groundwater, those could be contaminated and then linked back to humans. So it's kind of a difficult topic to address. But yeah, I'm in particular looking at the bioavailability for ecological receptor, and maybe I will tell you later how I do that with my props.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sabrina. I would like to go now to OK. You mentioned that you look at manufacturing data, and data is a fascinating thing to study, especially now that we are moving to a digital era. So which are the challenges that you see in the manufacturing world of using data to inform strategies for remanufacturing?
Okay, thank you for the question. So yeah, like you did mention, my research area has a larger, the larger pool, I would say, is Industry 4.0, which is where we are moving to. And that basically involves a lot of data. One major challenge that we have with data is the fact that in accessing this data, we still need to develop new ways, new forms of accessing and getting data. Right now, we use a lot of sensors in getting data, but the data is gotten, then dumped somewhere, and most of the times it's not used. So I hope obviously to use some of this on data. And also a key point is the data linked to remanufacturing. At the moment right now, remanufacturing, which is being done, is quite labor intensive, and they use less data. The data that the remanufacturing companies use, they use it, they get it from the major automobile manufacturers, and this is just design information, that's design data, and that's like basically the much data that they get. So one reason why they don't have this large information, which they would actually ideally want, is the fact that the chains of data transfer are not actually they're not more solidified in place in companies. I think one reason, again, is what I've seen in my research, is because of these companies they're quite used to the old way of doing things, and to have that change, we might need a change in perhaps vision, or a change in perhaps structure, where there'll be a chain of transfer of data. So actually my work actually looks at that as well. So yeah, so in going forward, when that chain of data transfer within stakeholders in remote patching has been developed, then I'm accessing data through that transfer, then hopefully using the data. So that is the major challenge in data and accessing data. The fact that data is available, but they are no visible, no known structures in accessing data from the different stakeholders involved in manufacturing, as it were.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And now I will go to Tobias as well about challenges in your research. And it's very fascinating that you're looking into the concept of value, and because it's a big thing. Value is a big word, I will say. But you said that you are looking from for products that or systems that are more complex in their nature. So as you said, there is a lot of research on in quite simple products such as washing machines or prams or even photocopiers, with the example of Xerox. So what are the challenges that you see when you talk about value and in more complex products?
Yeah, so as you say, right, I read the other day a quote which was something like, value is probably the most ill-defined term in management. So challenges which come with value are obviously that they have a perceptive component. So you can't quantify them really. So when it comes to more complex systems, we look at we look at business solutions. Although we look at the entire value creating system, we look at business B2B solutions. So value, I define as always as the ratio between the benefits and the sacrifices, meaning the potential value that the company can create and the risk they are gaining from and the impact that they are creating. So these three components, having value, risk, and external impact. As challenges, to call them risks or challenges, what we see is that the complexity within the network increases. I heard you on the other talk, I think it was with system dynamics, using a system thinking. I think it applies for all of us, to try to reduce the complexity of these systems. So one way of doing that actually and creating value is to own the risk, which is one of the big motivators for a customer within outcome-based contracting. Because they outsource the risk to the supplier, the supplier internalizes the risks and actually controls it. So he, for example, has the control over human factors, or a better control over human factors, which can be the wrong use of components, of equipment. So if he sees how a customer uses the equipment, using, for example, data analysis, he can then improve the processes on how the service is provided, and with that increase the reliability, the availability of the service he is providing, in reducing the risk. One further way is, again, talking what you just mentioned, using data and as a means to increase predictive maintenance, which is a huge topic. So in outcome-based contracting, the customer basically pays for the availability of a system, right? So the supplier has his job is to keep the system running. And through this predictive maintenance, the customer, the supplier can actually ensure the uptime of the goods. So these are all these different forms of values. investigated 17 different manifestations of values within such a service system. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm looking that we have some questions from the audience. So I will start with a question to OK, because it comes in line to what Tobias was saying as well about how we could use data. So the question comes from Lisa, and she says, it sounds like getting hold of data is tricky. What specifically are the main obstacles, and what would make this easier?
Okay, to be specific, I'll use an example. If, for instance, you have a washing machine, and washing machine now these days are quite digitalized, and it's used for a particular period, say, let's say X amount of years, let's say 10 years. And for the 10 years, it's now, it packs up, for instance, and then it's put aside. During that 10 years, the washing machine has had the motor in it has had many RPMs. It has been the number of time it has been powered for electricity is there as well, and there are a lot of information that the washing machine can actually give you. But now this is actually packed up because one of the key stakeholder, in this case the customer, does not have a means of returning that information back to the company. And then if the customer does not have such information, if the company doesn't have such information, then transition to a circular approach. There's that breakage there. So the key challenge in this case I've mentioned is a very, very common case, is actually the data transfer from the end user back to the company. In this case, there's no way. There's no for most household items, or for most items, there is no way in which that information is actually sent back to the manufacturer. Thankfully, we have a system which we can actually adopt, in which, for instance, if your laptop crashes, the information, the data information is sent back to Apple, for instance, and they can analyze it and then tell you through communication what fault what fault your MacBook has. And that is where we want to go to in my research. So my research, it's now I'm looking at hybrid cars. Hybrid cars are still in use. So in data transfer, in this case, would be the obstacle here is now when the car is being in use, because that is other part of manufacturing data. How do we now take the information, perhaps crash statistics, perhaps temperature information, perhaps vibration analysis on the moving components? How do we take this back to the manufacturer to now have my manufacturer, use make analysis on it, and then decide an end of life state for the component that's perhaps the more expensive component that he wants to work on. So that's the key challenge which I have seen. And the secondary challenge under this is actually the non-availability of framework that will support that data transfer.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
And there is another question from the audience, and this is directed to Sabrina. And probably with these questions, you could use your prompt to explain us more what you do. So the question is, are there more circular contaminated land remediation techniques that consultants can use? And what happens to the contaminants? Can they be used elsewhere as valuable resources?
So this is not exactly the focus of my research, but I'll try to respond to everything.
Okay.
So regarding the techniques, we have, as they do, we have 14 researchers working in the same topic. And some of my colleagues, they actually focus on life cycle assessment. So life cycle assessment can help, even though it's not really used yet, it's quite an innovative way of looking at remediation. Is a way of giving an idea of how much specific remediation will cost. However, there are so many factors involved that sustainability at day doesn't always come first in the decision, unfortunately, but everybody is looking to move forward with that. In particular, there are different already existing framework like SURF UK, which is kind of addressing people that work in contaminated land and promoting the idea of sustainability. So yes, there are some techniques that are more sustainable, and we kind of move forward because 30, 40 years ago, people would just didn't even know anything about remediation and the power of our technique, and they just apply the dig and dump. So they just dig the soil out and dump it in the landfill. Nowadays, they don't do that as much, or at least not in site that could be potentially remediated. So there are fractions which still might be too contaminated for any technique. But nowadays, the majority of the people, they go for the remediation. And within remediation, there are different techniques which are in situ, so where the contamination is, which is kind of cheaper, while ex situ, you need to excavate all the soil and bring it somewhere else. But it really depends on what contaminant and how can you remove it. And regarding what happened to the contaminants, well, organic, they can't really be recovered. The focus of the recovery is on metals. And in Cranfield University, we have another project which is called Mud Ground, and is looking at mapping a lot of landfill across which is somehow contaminated land as well, across Europe, trying to recover the metal which could be valuable and it could be reused. So there's a lot of thinking around recovering these materials. It's not really what we do within my network, but it's what people are trying to do, because there are plenty of materials and waste in the soil also that could be recovered, but that would take still some time. I've also went to a lecture last year where they've been using some plants to recover gold or some precious metal from the soil. But then it's not always so easy, the mechanism, but that's a good way of recovering materials as well. I think I responded to everything.
I think so too.
Someone's asking me, and what would make this easier? Okay, I didn't see that. Okay, I did not mention the obstacles I mentioned were more related to engineering and to the obstacles that in supply chain. But one major question that I have seen in research is actually the legal side of data. I mean, who owns the data? I think that is still nagging, and until that is resolved, there's a big chunk of work to do in terms of data capture. And what could make data capture easier? I think as well, in terms of, it is actually getting slightly bit much easier now through the use of IoT, through the use of sensors in most of our components. And in fact, that's what my research is actually going to focus on, using sensors to capture this data. So as we're moving deeper into the Industry 4.0 age, we would see sensors being more deployed. As SAP had a figure of data that will be captured in the next by 2020, and it's quite large what it was in the past decade. So as we're moving into the Industry 4.0 age and having sensors on our components, data capture will be much easier for us to utilize for transition into a circular economy.
Great, thank you. So now we are having a question for Tobias, which is also from Lisa, and the question she has is, in your experience, what is the main barrier for the uptake of product service systems in enabling collaborative consumption?
Yeah, Lisa. So my research is predominantly focusing on B2B. So collaborative consumption, not very much a topic there, but I still try to answer the question. So if you look at the collaborative consumption for, let's say, less complex goods, like household goods or whatever, or even like car sharing and things like that, one major challenge is the acceptance. The uncertainty of what are you expecting as a customer. So there's one thing of I want to use it, I want to own it, the good, and not just use it. That is one big challenge, that kind of the prestige. And the other, I'm trying to remember the word. It is something called like the contamination effect, I think. So basically, if you have a clothes sharing business model, that people, even though the clothes are like dry cleaned and clean, they don't want to wear other people's clothes. So I think it's called the contamination effect or something like that. That is a very big barrier from a consumer perspective. However, these can be overcome with education, basically, and informing the customer. Because if you're in a restaurant, for example, you're using the fork that 1,000 people before you have used, right? So why not using a jacket which 50 people before have used? So that is kind of a transformation process of the society where we have to go. Another thing is data protection. Who owns the data? Again, especially for example, for a company, having the data coming from the use of the goods, it is quite tempting for a company to sell this data, because it is an additional revenue stream, right? Yeah. So why not selling it? But it is, from the customer perspective, even though it might increase the quality of the service, it is kind of, you get a bad feeling, even though you broadly share your information every minute of your day with your phone on you. From a company perspective, it is one risk if you have subscription model, a subscription business model, is that you run into an uncertainty of revenues, which is maybe counterintuitive, because PSS literature says, or like the general perception says, that with servitized goods you have more stable revenue incomes, right? Which makes it easier for your day-to-day operation, but you have to internalize the asset. So basically, you have to own everything you sold before. And basically, if I sell you a phone and I give you 500 pounds or whatever, you got the money, right? But if you just have it as a service and pay me, I don't know, 10, 50 pounds a month to have it, at the risk that I'm not able to maintain this contract is higher, as I actually don't get the money. I hope that makes sense. And within the companies, it is the cultures, which is seen broadly within all servitization literature, being it complex good, not complex, uncomplex good, because it does, as every transformational process within an organization, it leads to redundance of roles and new roles, right? Yeah. So basically, if I have a business model where I sell as a supplier, I engage in outcome-based contracting. There are people within my customer's company which are made redundant. But there are new people, new roles, which then are the key people, the key informants within the new business model, and that leads to tensions within individuals with the company. That leads to tensions within the business units, but as well to tensions within the customer and the supplier during the transformation phase. So that. It goes a bit in what you said, like having a strong leadership, having a a clear strategy on where you want to go is very important, but it needs a strong culture. It's like this famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is really important to have this culture. Just one thing I want to add when it comes to challenges in general, when it comes to outcome-based contracting or product service system, that these very few examples of successful business model. There are studies showing that servitization leads to more risk, that servitization is not necessarily profitable. There is a recently published study that says that these traditional case studies we have, with like OCE and IBM things, that they actually engage in deservitization. I would say in general, when it comes to these kind of business transformations, especially talking about existing companies, that it is always the companies that survive that have been successful already. If you are a SME producing, I don't know, or even a larger company producing complex goods, engineering goods, or not so complex goods, most companies are struggling on their day-to-day life in the market competition. And as long as they're struggling and competing, they don't have the capital, they don't have the resources to engage in a service transformation. So it is very hard to build up these incentives if the company is not already successful and doesn't have the resources to transform, which I would say it is within traditional management literature one of the biggest obstacles. How do you transform if you're not already successful?
Of course. So thank you. We have just 5 minutes for our last question. So so I will this is coming from Fiona, and her question is, and this question is more about like advice for future students that might want to embark into the circular economy topic. So what is your advice to researchers considering starting a PhD in the circular economy field? Could you?
So as a general response, not only in the circular economy, but in particular here, I think you have to be a very motivated person, because our job is to bring innovation and somehow to convince people that we have to move forward. So I think you just have to be very passionate about your topic and very motivated, so you can bring your research into something valuable. But it does apply to any PhD research, I guess. But yeah, my advice is just to love what you do, like us.
That would you say? Okay.
Well, I would say, I mean, the key advice is that the key advice is actually have a specific passion, a specific motivation for your PhD, and that should be what will actually guide you through. It could be quite long and challenging. Trust me. I mean, we all know that. So it's that motivation that would actually, fuel the fire for the next couple of years. For CE, I would say it's quite important that you know that you would have to be successful in CE research. You have to do a lot of collaboration, and that's what I have seen. My area, I mean, more specifically, it's digital technologies, IoT, automobile. But for that will be if I'm just focusing on a circular approach. But for the circular economy, you have to look at things that actually make that approach work. So the business models, the frameworks that will support that idea that you want to put forward, everything entirely, that is part of the PhD, which you have to produce and also contribute as a body of knowledge at the end. So it's key that you know that you collaborate. Now we are doing collaborations quite a lot. I mean, here in Cranfield, I collaborate a lot researchers in Nottingham, in Sheffield, and also other parts of the globe, thankfully. So that's one thing that would help you quite a lot if you go into a circular economy focused research.
What is your advice, Tobias?
Yeah, I mean, I can just support what my two colleagues just said.
That's really true.
even after 1 year. As Oke just said, it is a very transdisciplinary research, which people have to know and be comfortable with. One thing I learned or had to learn, I'm an engineer by background, by education, is that you have to think on how do you want to do your research and address the research. There is the engineering approach, which is this problem-solving approach.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a challenge, we have to solve this challenge, this is our problem. And then there is the social science approach, where you look more at the underlying mechanisms and find out what are the actual problems within. For example, in my research in the supply chain. So it is in supply chain management, like I do it now. It is not about looking, okay, how efficient can I do? How can I design the supply chain from A to B? It is more about trying to find out what are the enabling conditions, what are the motivators and the barriers between the organizations, the companies, etc. So this is something as a future maybe PhD researcher, you have to be very conscious about on what you want to do. Both is very important. Both can be very interesting, but it's just a different way of attacking or having a fight which we are having at different fronts of disciplines. Yeah.
Good. And just a last follow-up question from me. It's about, because the three of you say about collaboration, and I see that Sabrina and Tobias belong to a larger group of collaborators. And also, okay, it's not a Marie Curie program, but you, as you said, you are collaborating with other universities in your research. So could you briefly explain in 2-3 words that experience, how has been for you belonging to these larger groups of people to do your research?
Well, already being in Cranfield is a group because we are from basically everywhere. And that's actually the beauty of this university to me, being multicultural. And regarding my group, there are challenges, but mostly good part of being within a group, because I don't really have a group in the university that works in contaminated land, so nobody really understands my challenges on a day-to-day basis. But my colleague, instead, I can always contact them and ask them advice and get support. So there is this kind of feeling part of something, and that you're not alone, and when you have challenges you can go back to them and get a quick response. And also for the future, we surely are gonna remain in contact and perhaps working together in a company or within the university, and you kind to start to form your network, because it looks like it's a huge topic, but like any topic, the people working within the topic, there are just a few. So after a few conferences, you start knowing everybody. And regarding the challenges, it's mostly about learning more about yourself and how you come across to people in stressful situations. Because I don't know about you, but we spend a week together of training day to day, like back in school. And it can be very stressful when there's plenty of different personalities, because there's always someone who wants to take over, someone which remain in the corner. So sometimes it's about finding your place within the group and allowing everybody to give their own contribution. But I'm very grateful for being part of this group, and I want to thank you, my sponsor, the Horizon 2020, and everybody for allowing us to be together.
Tobias?
Yeah, so we had a couple of weeks ago the pleasure to host our fellow colleagues from our research project from Essen University, Delft, Leiden, NTNU, Linköping, and Grenoble. Did I hopefully not forget anyone? And having these colleagues together, we had the 2 times which we met, we had a very great experience, and very good dynamic and team bonding kind of. Challenges I didn't encounter so far. it went quite well with us. I see one of the big benefits which we have, apart from the group experience and from the very strong network you get. You have individuals which do research on your topic. As you are within a department, I don't know how it is for you, but if you're doing research on your topic, you very soon get to a certain point where colleagues within your department have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're all in that point.
So sorry to my supervisor, but it is true, because if you read all the relevant literature in your field, you get a lot of contextual and topic knowledge on your field. And if you're part of a bigger research network, it is more likely that you have a direct contact to individuals which actually know what you're talking about, which then comes further and helps you to collaborative work when it comes to publications, for example. So we have, as said, 15 PhDs in business model, supply chain, user design, and systems. So we try to have these collaborative approaches and try to at least get one publication, like within each person has at least one publication with one person from another field of those 5, which gives you publications and co-authorship, but as well gives you the possibility to really bring research knowledge a step further.
Well, and it helps you to see the problem from another side.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's the collaboration I've had, which I'm so thankful to Cranfield for the opportunities. It's been very vast. They give you a different perspective to a thing. So you might read all the whole literature that is there available. You might have the best of knowledge. You might have the best of degrees. But there might be one area that you haven't seen. So it's always good to have a second pair of eyes, and that network, that person that you're collaborating with would look at it and tell you, I think you should have done this. What about this way? And once you look at it in where they're looking at, that would add some meat to your research, and that could actually bring out a paper, which is thankfully it's happened a few times in mine, and that would overall support your work, your overall content. So it's because for research is important that while you're looking at a singular area, it's important that other areas are also not missed. Like we say, PhDs, you start from a big thing and go downwards. Going downwards in a triangular form means that you had a big thing that you're looking at, and that perspective contributes to the entire research. So it's been very useful, the collaboration.
Thank you guys for that final remarks. So now I think we have another question, but I think we are run of time now. But you could go to the web page and continue engaging with further questions that might come. So I think it's now back to you, Leo.
So, Emma, just to answer your question, there is a publication in Resource Conservation and Recycling, which is called Conceptualizing the Circular Economy, an analysis of 114 definitions. and they make 115th. So there is quite some research on circular economy, but what I feel is the lack to other disciplines, because it's still on a very broad and holistic way.
It is very broad.
Yeah.
It is very
It
broad.
doesn't tackle the real life challenges.
Okay, thank you. I think that's our final remark.
Great. Thank you, guys. And it would be great, Tobias, if you could perhaps provide a link to that piece of research on the session page. I think that'd be quite interesting for the viewers if they wanted to have a look at that paper. But thank you very much for your time. So yeah, as Mariella just said, we didn't quite get enough time to answer that last question from Ella, but thank you very much, Mariella, for coordinating that, and thank you, Tobias, Sabrina, and Oki, for giving us insights into your circular economy orientated research. And thank you to the audience as well that supplied your questions. That was some really interesting responses, and it was good to hear PhD research focused around 3 different areas, and I'm sure you could have, each of you, spoken at length around your research. So we had contaminated land, we had manufacturing data, and product service systems, which is quite a varied array of research just from 3 of you. And I think it's nice to hear that you gave advice, the advice that you gave to people that were interested in carrying out circular economy related PhD research, and the tips that you gave in order to pursue a circular economy related research PhD. You need to be driven and focused. You need to put yourself out there, and you need to be comfortable with being transdisciplinary and collaborative. And as was mentioned towards the end, being part of a bigger research network can really help you find other similar researchers out there that actually know what you're talking about, as Tobias mentioned. Again, thank you all for posting your questions. And while we may be coming to the end of this session at the DIF, we still have a week and a half of sessions coming your way. The next DIF session from Cranfield University is in fact a presentation by Mariella Moreno, who facilitated this conversation. As she'll be giving a presentation titled "The Transition to Circular Design," which is actually part of the Cranfield curriculum on circular design, and that'll be released Monday the 20th of November at 1 p.m. But if you're looking for other sessions today, there's a really good one at 1 p.m. UK time in the live studio with the economist and author of the acclaimed book Donut Economics, Kate Rayworth, will be joining us in the live studio to discuss how we can all start to think like a 21st century economics. And if we missed, we mentioned earlier that there was a grilling of 3 lecturers and educators from Cranfield University in the session, grilled the Circular Geeks last Monday, and you can catch up on that at thinkdiff.co. And that's the same with any session that you missed in the first week and a half. Go to thinkdiff.co and catch up to your heart's content. Everything will be available for the remainder of the DIF and for 4 weeks afterwards. So thank you again, Mariella, Sabrina, Oki, and Tobias for being here at the DIF.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.